Who've joined online. If you've joined online, thanks for joining us. I'm Kevin Roberts, CEO of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Here in Austin, Texas, we have a great panel, these folks will do a great job discussing some of the pressing issues of the day, especially for those of us who live in Austin, but really these are global issues. And so I just want to give you a very warm welcome. One of the aspects of our culture here inside our organization isn't merely that we're the largest policy group outside the nation's capital. It's that we believe heavily in hospitality. So hopefully you have felt welcomed, and it's my job to welcome you. It's also my job to introduce our wonderful moderator, Garrett Johnson of the Lincoln Network. Garrett's going to do a great job moderating this discussion, and I'm going to step out of the way literally and figuratively and hand it over to him. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think I'm on. All right. So I appreciate you saying Lincoln Network. I spend way too much time differentiating us from the Lincoln Project. So we are not them. I appreciate that. Lincoln Network. Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here. I do not live in Texas, so I am honored to enjoy this little slice of freedom, even for the short trip that I'm here. Like a few people on the panel, I recently left California after a decade and moved to Florida. And it seems like it's a competition right now between Florida and Texas. Those are your two options if you want to escape wherever you are and enjoy the liberty and freedom that those states have to offer. So really excited to be here. Let's start with some audience participation briefly before we get into the discussion. How many people here think that the move out of places like California or New York is real, that there is a real migration happening caused in part by COVID? Raise your hand if you think that's real. Okay, most of the room, pretty much everyone in the room. Okay, raise your hand if you feel that that migration is going to be sustained, is going to be long-term, that there's going to be a long-term shift that's caused by COVID and all of the other factors associated with what we've gone through over the past year or two. Do you think it's long-term or short-term? If you think it's long-term, raise your hand. Okay, so most people here think that there is something real going on. And so I think it's important for us to unpack that and understand why tech in Texas is really becoming something that everyone is fascinated about and trying to understand what's going on. Just briefly, Lincoln Network is an organization that really focuses on being a bridge between the tech industry and policymakers in DC, but increasingly around the country. And so putting these types of events on increasingly outside of California in places like Austin, we'll be in Miami next week for some events, is a way for us to bring the tech community together with policymakers and talk about these important topics. I am excited to be joined by incredible panelists, two who are recent transplants to Texas. And Stacy is a longtime resident, multiple generations of Texans run in her family. And so you'll get a diverse perspective from the panel. So directly to my left is Jack Ryan, and I will give each of them a chance to introduce themselves, but just briefly, Jack has a really incredible career, which includes being a partner, former partner at Goldman Sachs. More importantly, taking time out to teach high school in Illinois after a very successful career at Goldman, and now as the CEO of Rex Homes. And he'll tell you more about that, as well as a new school that he's launching, which I had the privilege of going to see this morning. And there's an incredible story there that I think everyone would benefit from. I'll come to Stacy last. We'll go to Geoff after hearing from Jack. And Geoff recently moved to Austin, and he has a really accomplished career as an investor, managing partner of Bedrock. Previously, before that, a partner at Founders Fund. Some of the fastest growing companies in the country right now, in the world, he has backed and is investing in. And so he has moved his company, his team here to Texas. And last but not least, Stacy, as I mentioned, has generations of Texans in her family. And she really sits at the intersection of public policy as a board member of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, but also a trained engineer from MIT, and a serial investor and an activist on a range of topics, school choice being one of them. So I'll start with you, Jack. If you can talk to us a little bit about why Texas for your family, why Texas for your company.
Glad to. Do I need the microphone or for you? Yeah, you do? Okay.
I think for the people on camera, yeah.
Okay. Am I on?
I think you turned it off. There you go. Okay.
Am I on? Hard to believe I run a tech company. By the way, Garrett didn't really introduce himself very well. You may not know that he was the national champion in the shot put in 2006. He is a Rhodes Scholar. He finished #1 in his class at Florida State. I could go on, but I'm very flattered to be sitting next to him and to Stacy and Geoff. They've all had very successful and very amazing careers. I think the reason that Austin, Texas will continue to grow is not because of COVID. I think it's because of freedom and culture. I think independent of COVID, you would see a great migration to Austin, Texas. And I think for any city that's trying to become great, like Austin is becoming or has become, is because of freedom and culture. Those are, I think, the two main things. And there is a tie to Rex, the company I work with, on freedom and culture, because the industry that we're in is, if you can believe it, it sounds very prosaic, the residential real estate brokerage business, right? So it seems like that doesn't seem like a very interesting business to be in. But when you think about freedom and culture, it probably is one that lacks the most. And I'd like to prove the point about freedom and culture being important by proving the opposite, if you would. So just to give you a sense for this in the US, did you know that in the US, it costs about 5 to 6% to sell a home, but in the UK, it's about 1 to 2%? Why would it be in the US, in a free country, that it costs 2 to 3 times as much to sell a home as it does in most developed countries in the US? Does that strike you as peculiar, that that would be the case? And why is it always the same fee, whether you live in Austin, Texas, or Detroit, or San Francisco, or New York? It's always the same fee. And why is it always the same fee, whether it's a $300,000 home or a $3 million home? Why is it always the same fee, whether you're the first person, it's your first year in residential real estate, or you're a 30-year vet? Why would it always be the same fee? Does that make any sense? It's odd, isn't it? And why is every other middle market or middle man, middle woman, all the intermediaries, their fees have dropped 80 to 90% with the advent of the web, other than residential real estate agents, taxi dispatchers, stockbrokers, travel agents? Fees gone way down, but one is still 5 or 6%. And why is it in good markets it's 5 and 6%? Like in Austin right now, it takes what, 3 days to sell a home, and the fees are audience participation time. Guess what the fees are? 5 to 6%. Amazing. This is a smart crowd. And the opposite was, which I think is why the Department of Justice got so involved in the situation recently, because of Mike Toth's good work, who's here somewhere, and I think the rest of us at Rex, is I think the final sticking point was when the economy went into a 15% decline during COVID, the price of everything dropped. right? We all know supply and demand. Demand went way down, and the price of gas, and the price of hotels, and the price of food, price of everything dropped. Except for one fee. Guess which one? Residential real estate fees. Isn't that weird that no matter what the situation is, the fee is 5 to 6%? So this shows there's a lack of freedom, right? When the fee is set, it sounds like it's set by a government entity. In this case, it's a trade group called the National Association of Realtors. Now, the second question about freedom is, should we care? Who cares? What's the damage? Why should we care about freedom and culture? Why does this make Texas unique? Well, think about this for a second. $2.5 trillion of transactions per year in residential real estate. Let's take the average fee in the UK of 1.5%, and the US is 5.5%. The rent being extracted by the monopoly is 4% on $2.5 trillion. So that means $100 billion is going from middle-class Americans to residential real estate brokers. That's just the first order effect. Think about things that all of us here in this room care about. Think about school choice. Let's say you live in a house in Detroit, and now the value of the house is worth the value of your mortgage because the price of the house has gone down, and you want to move to a better school district for your child, but you can't because the mortgage is the same as the price of the house, and you can't pay the 6% fee on the $200,000 to move your child to a better school. Or let's say that you care about job mobility, and you're in Detroit and you're a welder. Oh, the time sign just went up. Does that mean I'm out of time?
Getting close.
I'll wrap up really quick.
Just for the intros, there's going to be plenty of time to come back.
Okay, so I just want to say, think about if you're on job mobility. You want to move from Detroit to Austin because they pay welders more, but you're the same situation again. You can't move. You can't reach your highest and best use as a human because of the residential real estate brokerage business. Let's say you're a carpenter, a plumber, an electrician. All those jobs cluster around the purchase and sale of homes. When those are suppressed because of fees, they get paid less, there's less jobs. So in conclusion, I'm just using this as an example. When you don't have a culture of freedom and a culture of hard work, really bad things happen. And when you have, as I just hopefully gave you an example of, but when you have a situation of freedom and culture, which I'll come back to in a second, because there's another reason we moved to Texas, which I'll share with you in a second, then you get the flourishing of the human spirit and the flourishing of the metropolis, which is Austin.
Well, thank you. And we will come back to the second reason why you moved to Texas. So Geoff, when I drove in yesterday from the airport, I stopped on the Cesar Chavez exit to get to my hotel, and my car was attacked by guys with squeegees cleaning my windshields. And I initially reacted with some fear and trepidation, but then I thought if I were in San Francisco, my windshield would probably be broken by now. And so at least they're coming to squeegee my windshield and not break my windshield. So there seems to be a lot of talk about San Francisco being absolutely out of control right now. And that is driving a lot of people out. The bad governance in general, the taxes, the high cost of living. So there's a number of factors that could cause people to leave. So what motivated your move from California to Texas?
Sure. Well, I'd say that it has been this really striking. I think you did a really nice job of articulating some of the facts, but I just sort of dimensionalize for folks the decline in California. I moved to Silicon Valley in 2010, and San Francisco was really not the center of Silicon Valley at that point. The tech industry was really still centered down in the South Bay and in areas that quite honestly looked a lot like, suburban Houston or Promise, Texas, or, like out by Lakeway or places like that. That's kind of what Silicon Valley looks like. And around the time I sold my startup and joined Founders Fund and began investing in 2012, there was this massive migration of entrepreneurial energy to the city of San Francisco. And this real belief amongst technologists that living in San Francisco is really akin to living in a sort of Renaissance Florence, like living in Florence during the Renaissance or something like that. And you actually would hear people talking of San Francisco like this. And instead of these incredible sort of frescoes like they had in Florence and paintings and beautiful statues, you have sort of like, cocktail bars in San Francisco and sort of public parks for the homeless people to live in and things. So somehow there were these things along the way that seemed maybe not quite the same as Florence in the Renaissance, but nonetheless, you had the tech industry sort of continuing to believe this. And it really felt like the narrative was starting to break circa sort of 2017 onwards. And so you sort of, you had the sort of commercial real estate. We've talked a lot about the residential real estate industry, which trust me, I'm not a fan of those lobbying organizations that keep those 5 to 6% commissions. But nonetheless, the sort of commercial real estate rents in San Francisco just sort of got out of control. You had actually landlords in San Francisco capturing the majority of venture capital dollars starting in 2017. So from 2017 to 2020, the majority of venture capital dollars invested in the San Francisco Bay Area actually went to commercial real estate landlords. So anyone here who's in the commercial real estate business, if you had exposure to San Francisco, you probably did really well. So all these signs, things are actually quite off. And along the way, San Francisco actually, it was never that good of a place to live. And so it was sort of, when I moved there in 2010, it was like, okay, we have to be here because it's like Florence or Rome during the Renaissance, sort of have to live here. But there's sort of all these problems with it. The people believe lots of crazy things. That's sort of a starting point of something that's very off with it. You've got sort of the homeless issue. You've got a problem that frankly Austin has as well. And I'm quite concerned about it. You've got a very weak mayor. So you've got a very strong board of supervisors in San Francisco, which means no matter who the mayor is, they really don't have much power. And I think there's a version of that in Austin that's different from, say, Dallas or El Paso or Houston, which I think actually puts Austin at risk in a way that might be analogous to San Francisco. There's sort of all these problems with the city. And the reality is that by late 2019, 70 or 80% of the people in my social circle, founders, investors, entrepreneurs, no one really wanted to live there anymore. People wanted to get out, but COVID was sort of the excuse. And you have just seen this mass exit from the Bay Area. I initially went somewhere even more crazy socialist. I went to Hawaii for a little bit. I like surfing. It's sort of like, hey, might as well try and get in the sort of crazy socialist environment while I can before I go back to real life. And then there's, as you alluded to, there aren't that many options left in the States. I'd say Florida, a lot of investors are moving to South Florida. I do think amongst the sort of heterodox young people I know. So I'm always trying to key into, as a technology investor, you're always trying to spend a lot of time with very low status people. So sort of the opposite of DC. So you're sort of in the DC world, you want to be around high status people, sort of a city that's sort of optimized around status and connectivity. And as a technology investor, I want to be around very young, low status people who have crazy ideas, who everyone laughs at because they're super nerdy and they aren't connected and they're outsiders. And those outsiders are increasingly coming to Texas. California does not feel like the frontier for them anymore. They are moving either abroad or to places, quite honestly, New York is picking up momentum now. Texas, to the extent they're going to California, they're not going to San Francisco. And so there is sort of this one-time moment where Texas really can, I think, become a magnet for these young innovators. It really felt in 2010 like California was still the frontier. Today, I say that Texas really does feel like the frontier in the United States at this point.
So, Geoff, I want to come back to several things you talked about and double click on it. But for now, let's go to Stacy. Stacy, your family seems like stretches back to the pioneer days. So, Texas is getting a lot of attention right now for certain policies that people are criticizing have gone wrong. Right? But there's a reason why Geoff just said what he did. Everyone is coming to Texas. Lots of people are coming to Texas because there's a lot going right in Texas. So I think we should probably give you credit for a lot of your work that you've been doing to get a lot of those policies right in Texas. So help us understand, why are people coming to Texas? What does Texas get right that a lot of other states don't?
Well, thank you, Garrett, and thanks for having me. I can't take any credit for the great systemic structure that Texas has to offer and the moment that it's having right now. But it's really fun to be a part of it and to see it come to fruition. my family does go way back. There are parts of it that helped settle parts of East Texas. There are parts of it that showed up in Galveston with no background. So I'm pretty sure that means we're criminals. But, Texas has long meant freedom and opportunity, and it's had a real comfort with risk. It's had no sense of entitlement. It's a very much a rugged kind of individualism where you help each other out. But you also understand that nothing is guaranteed. And so that has woven into the culture in a way that I think we all take for granted. When I moved back to Texas, born and raised here in Austin, and it's fun when your hometown grows up with you. But when we moved back from New York, I was so grateful for all of the progress that I had continued to see. But I know that a lot of those seeds were planted decades before. We had a big crisis in the 80s when the oil and gas combined with the, savings loan collapse in Texas realized we need to diversify. We don't want to just be the energy capital. We want to be the capital of telecom at the time. We want to be the capital of what has become biotech, but at the time, biosciences. And, each one of these different industries that we've gone into with zeal, there's been a real excitement and openness and a flexibility. And I feel that, an ecosystem takes more than just sun and water. So you think of Texas and you think low taxes, very predictable taxes, very streamlined. My friends are shocked to learn you don't have to file anything with the state of Texas regarding your income. And they're just very confused by that. And I'm thinking of all the time that we're all saving on that. So we have work to do. Obviously, we have some, I always call them Achilles heels. And I spend more of my time thinking about Texas's Achilles heels or a low hanging fruit and what we need to improve. So property tax is among those. But, at least property tax is reasonably predictable, and a one-time event sales tax is predictable and kind of a seamless experience. Texas tends to do that. We tend not to get overly bureaucratic in the weeds with how people live their lives. We tend to believe in property rights. So for the most part, if you buy property, you can do with it what you want. So that instills itself in business. It allows people to be creative, to dream big, and to pursue it. It also takes low regulatory environment, which is very closely related. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to individuals who have moved here in the past decade out of the practicality of wanting to do something and finding that they had no chance to get it off the ground in their state of California. And, the land of milk and honey, it has every advantage under the sun, and folks have to come here to try their ideas. And they hope to be able to retire back to California. Well, I suspect after they live here for a couple of decades, they're going to stay and just go visit, because you just can't give it up once you have the opportunities, and it's contagious. And then, the last thing I'll say is it does take some very forward thinking and also just luck as far as having some big whales who help start the ecosystem, because social networks are very sticky. There's a lot of inertia in where you live and in the folks that you know and in your favorite restaurants and in your home. And it takes big catalysts like COVID to have the kind of extreme migration that we've seen recently. But that was simply a breaking point or an opportunity point for what had been simmering for a very, very long time. But when I think about Austin in particular, I have to give credit to individuals like Michael Dell, who built their business here. And we're at UT, and UT's been a huge catalyst for people coming to Austin and liking the culture and wanting to stay. Another individual, Joe Lemont, who dropped out of Stanford and came to Austin and started Trilogy, and then spent 10 years recruiting some of the top folks coming out of school. My husband and I being two of the lucky recipients of being part of that culture. And so many folks came to Austin and fell in love with Austin and also got to know each other. Many stayed and started things here. Others went to California and always wanted to come back and have come back. So those begin to plant the seeds of an ecosystem that grows and fosters. I could go on and on, but there's just a lot of facets that have contributed to this moment that we're experiencing here in Austin and in Texas. I'm grateful for it. And
well, there's so much to talk about there, so I'm going to come back to some of it. But one of the things you said, which segues back to you, Jack, there was something that people wanted to do in a state, say California, that they couldn't get done, but they came to Texas and they were able to get it done. And that's part of your story that I find compelling. In addition to building Rex here in Texas, you are building something else that I would argue is even more compelling, that's connected to Rex. So tell us about what you're building here in Texas that could have just a ton of impact.
Yeah, what Garrett's referring to is Amanda and I, and Amanda's right over there. She's my wife right there. You can see the brain power coming out of her head. That's the one right there. We wanted to start a boarding school for kids who could be excellent but lost access to their parents. And we're in California. And I couldn't tell you, Amanda can tell you better, how hard it is to do that in California. First of all, how many kids do you intend to have there? Does it fit the density restrictions? Do you know we're talking about kids who lost their parents? Can we get a break here? No. How many kids do you want on this campus? Number two is, what kind of curriculum are you going to use? Are you going to use our state curriculum? I don't want to use your state curriculum. Thank you very much. I see the results. No, thank you. I don't want to do that either. And also all the regulations they had about housing and everything else. There was an 85-acre ranch we looked at, and it was perfect for having a boarding school for kids who have ambition in life but lost their parents. And they said you can build 2 homes on this 85-acre property. Anyway, so we came out here to Texas for a summer, and the first property we saw, Amanda and I saw, was a 98-acre ranch out in Bee Cave. It looked like a great place for a boarding school for young children who had a spark of ambition, but just drew a bad break. And we were being taken around by the person who was showing us the property. And we were saying, how long does it take a permit to tear down these old structures? And he said, what do you mean, a permit? And I said, well, I mean, how long do you have to apply to get the permit to tear these old structures down? I don't know what you're talking about. You tear them down. Like, oh, well, okay, good. Then there's all these dense trees everywhere. And we were saying, well, how long does it take to get the permit to tear these trees out that are not great trees, that would not make it a great productive campus? He said, what do you mean? What do you need? You take them out. I was like, well, okay, that sounds good. And then also, how long does it take to build the school and the homes? And it was so much faster than California. And so here we are. The whole intention of Rex is to create the wealth to build what we hope to be one of the best boarding schools in the world. But our boarding school just happens to serve children who lost their parents. But we want to create one of the best you can. And it's much easier to do that in Texas. So I was talking about, freedom and how it's affected residential real estate and all the damage that's done when you don't have freedom. But when you do have freedom and a culture of people who want you to go for it, like you were saying, the people who are saying, this is the place where you can get stuff done. Texas is a great place to be. The last thing I'll say is our school does have a faith-based component to it. And in California, that makes things worse. It's like, you're going to have a faith-based component? Are you some sort of cult? I don't think so. It's pretty, common religion we're talking about. But now we're under suspicion. So we saw this ranch, and we already have two schoolhouses up. We have 2 visiting homes up. We intend to start building the homes themselves. And the idea is helping kids we don't know, but who we know need our help. And we can't be all things to all people. As you all know, better to light one candle than curse the darkness. So we're trying to look for children who have a spark of excellence or discipline inside of them, so that we can give them the comfort and the love and the security so they can become a Stacy or a Garrett or a Geoff. They don't have to do that, but let's give them the chance to do that by giving them the access to the best students or the best professors and the best people in the world. And so I talk about culture, the culture of Texas is very inviting. Almost everybody in Texas says, wow, that's a great idea. And in California, you get quizzical looks. And then the idea of freedom, that we can do this and the obstacles to doing so are helped. People try to help remove the obstacles as to throw them up. So for both the business point of view, low regulation, low taxes helps us to innovate. And Stacy, you're so right. It's when companies start in an area like Dell, and it kind of throws off innovation, or like Sun Microsystems or Hewlett Packard. When they start in an area, they throw off innovation. When Boeing moved to Chicago, their headquarters, it wasn't going to turn into a commercial airline capital. Who cares? I mean, it's not going to, throw off all these other geniuses who will start businesses. But when seeds of businesses germinate in a city and people see how it germinated, and they go, I can do that. That Jack Ryan guy is not so dang smart. I'm smarter than he is. If he can do it, I can do it. And they'll start their own little business, becomes a big business. And so I really think it's freedom and culture that creates the great opportunity for cities like Austin. Any city could do it, but a lot of them aren't as convinced about freedom and the culture of going forward as is Texas.
Well, let me bundle a few questions, and Geoff and Stacy would love your take on it. So you're talking about talent development, some incredibly deserving kids developing that talent, but there's immediate talent needs, Geoff, that your portfolio companies need. Stacy, that all the companies that you have mentioned here in Texas already that they need. Is that talent here, or is that talent moving here? What are you seeing with your companies, Geoff? And then Stacy, what's your sense of what's happening on the ground with that talent development? Is it local, or is it coming from other states?
Yeah, I'd say that the talent in Austin in particular, it's a real challenge, specifically in Austin on a few levels. One is just the infrastructure. There's not enough housing for folks within, Austin for people. So the housing price situation, I think, is getting a bit out of control. If you're sort of right out of school or trying to start a young family, you have to sort of live way out, and hopefully remote work is an unlock for more people working remotely and sort of working from home. So the commutes, but sort of the infrastructure in Austin specifically is a bit of an issue. So I actually think Dallas and Houston are drawing a lot in terms of young, right out of school folks or starting families. There's something about the infrastructure here in Austin, which I think we really need to work on as a city. I'd say the second piece is the mayor of Austin. He's not Mr. Adler. You're not in the audience, are you? Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure. He's not a great ambassador for everything the city has to offer. And I do think, and that's sort of, I'm trying to
is that an understatement? Yeah.
I think one of the things that you were touching on, Jack, Texans are very nice. So in California, they would look at you quizzically with the idea. Here, they're very nice. That, the school's an amazing idea. I'm trying to be more nice, calling him Mr. Adler and all that stuff. But in any case, there is this sense that we're in an era where increasingly you sort of need the mayors to be ambassadors for the cities, and you sort of need the government. We're in this era where the politicians need to really advocate and be ambassadors for what's right. And quite honestly, use an old-fashioned word here, courage. Be courageous. And you see examples, I think, from other mayors around the country, quite honestly, Francis Suarez in Miami being Exhibit A, where this guy is really out there advocating for his city in the trenches, using new media, actively, aggressively courting the technology community. And there's a sense in which you sort of don't really, there's no path to really Mayor Adler becoming anything like Mayor Suarez. And so that's a bit of a challenge. So those are two challenges. Now, the glass half full version of all of this is you do have a lot of talent that really wants out of these coastal cities. And there's a really short list of places that are appealing. I think it's, there's sort of Nashville, there's Austin, there's the other cities in Texas, there's the Florida cities. Some people want to live in Montana or Wyoming or Idaho or places like that. But I do think this mass migration away from the coasts is very real. And so I think there's infrastructure challenges and there's messaging challenges, but I think if we can work to solve those, I think there's a lot of talent that would be like excited to move here.
Before you jump in, Stacy, what's really funny about Suarez in Miami is he has no power, and he's the mayor of this small little strip of beach in Miami. So the guy has no power. He barely represents anyone, but he's become the face of this movement to attract more technology, more startups, more capital to Miami, just because he said, hey, how can I help you? And he said, we welcome new people to come in and we want to make it easy for you to start your company. So it's really fascinating, just a branding and marketing job that this mayor has done with zero power. Go ahead, Stacy.
It's so true and refreshing how often we expect government to be obstructionists. Back to a comment you made, Jack, when my husband and I bought some land a couple hours west of here. And one of the things I asked when we bought it was, what are the list of things we cannot do on this land? And they were like, it's your land, go to town. I was like, I'll take it. So, it's not something I think my parents would have thought to ask. And so now we don't take that for granted anymore. Structurally for Texas, I think we did a couple of things right. One, while our mayor may not be a good recruit, our governors have been. And so this is something that's gone back a while. And I think Rick Perry really accelerated it. He took on his job as governor to say, come to Texas, do business in Texas. We welcome you. We want you. How can we make this appealing? I'm gonna sell you on this. I'm gonna rope you in. And that moves people. When they will reach out to you, he would fly places and say, listen, what are your barriers? Come here. We will remove those barriers for you. And he set a new standard for that goal and the role of the governor to do that. And it became this kind of evangelist. And to some extent, in a different style, of course, Governor Abbott has continued that. And he's continued to champion that and see that as part of his role as this ambassador to the state. And I think that many of our even statewide elected officials see themselves as ambassadors to not just throughout the states, but even other countries to facilitate trade with our industries and folks here. People are really taking ownership in that, even with this very skeleton state government that we have. Another decision that was made under Perry was a massive investment in our higher ed research institutions. So he said, I want to make 8 of our universities, at the time, this was a while back, $100 million research budgets annually, which would be tier 1 institutes. That wasn't something that Texas had invested in that level before. And there's some real advantages to having surplus money and to having a rainy day fund and to having a balanced budget. So many of our counterparts, states that really should be in a similarly kind of fortuitous financial situation, find themselves very cash strapped and cutting their research budgets at their higher ed institutes. And these things do take a long time. But what we're seeing now is that we have multiple university systems, public, as well as some really exceptional private institutes that are top tier. And that's something that doesn't happen overnight. That takes investment and it pays off dividends. And so it is the fertile ground for people to come here, to work here, to do their business here. I do think affordability has been one of our big keys to success, and Austin is not as affordable as Houston and Dallas are for a variety of reasons, certainly as San Antonio and others. But that's something that people are hyper aware of and we're trying to manage. And I think that when we talk about the Achilles heels of Texas, along with property tax, some of the decisions in our cities are probably our other biggest Achilles heel. It's where we saddle ourselves with the most debt. It's where we're most vulnerable to those kinds of financial ruin. And certainly where we have allowed regulatory burdens to let housing and other things run amok, have restricted our ability to have the freedoms that we so cherish.
So we have less than 5 minutes for our conversation, and then we're coming to the audience to take questions. So please think of your best question and we'll come to you shortly. So rapid fire, I'm gonna ask quick questions. Please give quick answers. So Geoff, Brian Armstrong at Coinbase came up with this new approach to managing his company called Mission Driven Tech, where he wants the team to come and, amazing concept to actually do their job at work and not argue about politics. And it's novel, it's been debated, but he gave a 1-year update and he said that it's working. Do you think that's the model that can really take hold in places like Texas? Are people coming to Texas to try to be around people in their tribe or to just escape politics in general and just, live their lives? What's your take?
I think it's the latter. And I think Brian Armstrong really was prophetic with this whole, let's focus on the job and leave the crazy woke stuff. Like if you want to debate that in your free time, you can do that. And that's now conventional wisdom, I think, amongst founders. So I think you really did blaze the trail.
So Geoff, you on your Twitter feed is quite spicy. You had a picture of Gavin Newsom and his then wife, Kimberly Guilfoyle.
Isn't that stunning that those two are married?
It's incredible, incredible arc of that story compared to who she's dating now. And so they're laying across this rug, you know, sort of like something out of sort of Weatherman or Willfare or something like that. And so you have the picture of them juxtaposed to Elon Musk and said, you know, pick your fighter. And so, Stacy, why is Elon Musk coming to Texas? What does Tesla mean for Texas versus Rex coming or all these other companies coming? How do you balance that? Giving Elon, you know, attention, but also focusing on the companies like Rex that are coming here as well.
It's such a moment for Texas, you know, having these thought leaders come here, and for Elon to be here. I mean, it's not just Tesla. I'm actually probably a little more biased towards SpaceX. I'm excited for Texas to be the home and the future of telecom. I'm excited for us to be a hotbed for space exploration. And certainly, you know, we've been trying to lean in on automobile for a long time, and I'm thrilled to have Tesla here. And it's one of those ironic regulatory problems that we have legacy in Texas that you can't buy Tesla direct here in Texas. We hope to fix that sooner rather than later. But there's so many things Elon's working on. And that's the example of the individuals that we want to come here. We want folks who can dream really big, can be very bold, and can feel totally unencumbered by what the rest of the government or anyone else might want to put upon him and others as they're pursuing these things. So it has gone the opposite way that it should be. And Texas, I think, is due to really preserve kind of the right side. It's not profound to suggest that you should show up at work and be on mission and focus on your job. And we should not be looking to our employers to solve all the perceived ills of our society. And it's something that we have to stop dead in its tracks. And I appreciate courageous individuals who are willing to publicly do that, because it provides cover for the next person and the next person. And we can stop wasting each other's time.
All right, we're coming to the audience in just a second. Jack, one final question for you. You moved to Texas for reasons you articulated. You know, how does Texas continue to grow without becoming California, or maybe more specifically, Austin? How does Austin continue to grow and thrive without becoming California and sort of ruining the secret sauce that attracted you?
I think we should probably give a political test at the border. You can't come in if you don't answer certain questions correctly. I really don't know how you don't become California, or how California becomes Texas. I don't have enough insight into that. I would say, though, that it's the startups that create all the momentum. There's a professor from Berkeley who says the reason that in Hollywood you have all the movie producers, and in Silicon Valley you have all these tech people, New York has all the Wall Street people, is because of Adam Smith's division of labor, and because you get more and more specialized in certain activities, and then there's a clear match between the person you need and the person that's available, and this kind of reverberating effect. And I think that's going to happen increasingly with Texas, following up on Geoff's point, that as more startups occur here, more people in engineering come here, and they get more and more specialized in very specific things. They become very productive, and then they can move from job to job, get more and more productive because it's specific. I would say that I'm not trying to brag, Stacy, but we were the 10th largest hire last year out of MIT. I hope you're impressed by that. Okay. And last year we were also the top 5 hire out of Harvard. And it's not because we're elitist, it's just because I'm not an engineer. So I don't know how to find a good engineer. So I just go to MIT and say, tell me who your good engineers are. And then I solve the problem. There's a fellow right there named Will Fried who graduated from Harvard and got his master's degree in data science, who's helped us a lot with the Department of Justice to prove that prices never change under any circumstance. By the way, if you want to sell a home, you should sell it with Rex. Don't pay 5 or 6%. Some sell for 2%. So anyway, I think the way we don't become like California, is keep that startup culture occurring, because people who want to do startups want freedom, and they want a culture of people who want to work hard and be polite and interact with each other in a way that is humanistic.
I walk around Florida or my city in Jacksonville, and I see people walking around saying, "Don't California," or "Don't New York, my Florida." And I'm sure there's those versions here in Texas as well. So I think there is a secret sauce in Texas, and hopefully it's preserved. Questions from the audience? Any questions? Up front.
A little bit of research in our own foundation's domain of tech policy, and I was wondering what your opinion is of non-compete agreements, and how that the absence of the enforceability in California has played out, and how that's helped or hurt Silicon Valley, and what role that might play here in Texas, assuming they're still upheld in court.
Great question. It's when we talk about sort of Texas being this bastion of freedom, I really feel it in my bones that it's true. And then sort of the one counterexample is you sort of in California, if you're an employee of a company, you're free to sort of go start a competing company because non-competes are unenforceable. Whereas in Texas, like most states, they're enforceable by employers. It tends to be this talking point that every entrepreneur who's based in California throws it out as, well, what about the non-compete thing? Like, we could never be in Texas because the non-competes are enforceable. And then in practice, I don't actually think it's really a problem. And so it's sort of one of these weird things where it's always a talking point and always used to insult places like Texas and explain why California is better, is the non-competes are unenforceable there. And then in practice, I don't actually think it's a real issue for some reason. We have lots of investments in Texas. They don't have any problems with it. But I'm curious for other folks' perspective. It feels like a fake issue to me intuitively.
That's typically from a policy perspective been my take as well, that normally there are reasonable legal limitations on non-competes that don't tend to overly infringe on someone's rights. I would say there are a few industries, some parts of the financial sector come to mind, but there's a few cases where people, I think, are very observant of that for various reasons. But I think in the tech industry, that is rarely a barrier.
Questions? All right, we have one here.
I just wanted to ask what your views are on how the technology industry can actually help the city of Austin. The city of Austin has had a lot of self-inflicted wounds through people like the individual you mentioned, but it's a real problem. I mean, for those of us who live here, people like say, Austin's blue and a red state, no biggie. No, it's a biggie. It's a real biggie here. So how can technology and the new companies moving here how can they help?
I have some quick thoughts, and I'd love yours. A couple of ways come to mind. One is that the thing about technology, it's this all-encompassing thing, but it really is lifting up every single facet of our lives right now. And so to the extent that we get to be a hotbed for that, we get to have a little bit of a glimpse into the problems people are trying to solve and the promise that the future brings. And then also likely the economic benefits and the energy that goes around that. And I think that takes our eyes towards this optimistic, hopeful future, which is what I hold and feel for Austin and for Texas and for America. And I think we are all benefited by having a little bit of a glimpse and a little bit of touch on those things. I'll say that the individuals that I have met who are moving here, not only are they thought leaders, not only are they coming with capital and with jobs, but they are coming ready to engage. They have just upended their lives, and in many cases uprooted their businesses and therefore lots of other individuals' lives for these exact problems, and they don't want to do it again. And I, for one, really welcome that. I'm super excited for individuals who are ready to engage on a local level in our community, not just on the political sphere, but in others, creating the kind of culture that they want to be a part of for generations to come. That is what ends up shaping cities. And we need it here in Austin. We need it all over Texas. Like I said, cities are probably our Achilles heel, and it's been hard for individuals to know how to engage in local government. And I think we've had it made blazingly clear to us how incredibly important it is. So in Austin next year, we have a big election in November of 22, and we all need to start engaging now to understand who we want our city council members to be, who we want our mayor to be, and the conversations we're going to have with them during the election cycle to understand that. Because that's when public officials, they're human, they start to really craft their ideas of who they're going to be when they serve in that office. And there's obviously an election coming up in just a couple of weeks where there's a really important ballot initiative. And those kinds of things are what is gaining momentum in Austin, you know, bringing back the camping ban, hopefully bringing back police hiring and training. Those will send signals, really powerful signals, that the city council and the mayor are off the mark with the population of Austin, with the general broad population of Austin. Super helpful. And that'll totally change the narrative for the next year.
Do you have a comment, Geoff?
Yeah, I do. Just one that's specific, then another one is general. One is, you know, the cost of housing, and there's a 6% fee baked in the price of every home for no apparent reason. So when you use a firm such as Rex to buy your home, every home is 4% less. Imagine every price of every home in the U.S. is 4% less. About 1 million more people can afford a home, because that, you know, big 6% fee when everyone's shopping for homes on Zillow on their own, not asking some agent to drive them around, you know, Westlake Hills for, you know, 4 weekends in a row, 8 hours a weekend. We just give that money back to the buyer. So imagine the price of every home in the US going down by 4%. The second thing I would say is technology always creates more jobs. I think we should have a debate. If anyone knows Elon Musk, he's the one who's saying that technology and AI is going to destroy jobs and there'll be no jobs left. And I think that takes a very strange point of view given the history of the world. Every time we develop more technology, more jobs are created. The demands of humans are limitless. As you get more and more resources, there's more and more things that you think you can afford and you can buy and you want. We don't know what those things are, but you get more and more of them. So he's got a point of view that technology drives down the ability to be employed. But I'm sure people said, gosh, what happens to that poor guy who's used to, like, you know, get the hay out of the barn? This car is going to kill these jobs. Well, yeah, but wasn't that great a job in the first place? And then second of all, we need roads. We need people to help build the cars, et cetera. And so almost every development in technology has led to demand for more jobs and has given the human a broader ability to reach their full potential and their needs in life. So I'd love having a debate with Elon Musk about whether technology creates more jobs or less jobs. And for the last 3,000 years, it's created more jobs.
I'm sure TPPF would be happy to host that debate. So we'll get it on the books. Do we have one more question before we wrap?
Education has been the downfall of California. I came from there. We have our challenges here. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what we can do in the state of Texas to improve the opportunity for long-term growth, sustainable growth, because without kids coming through an educational system that works, we won't get there.
Well, I do have a point of view about that, because I keep trying to figure out, why does Florida have so much school choice and Texas doesn't? That makes no sense to me. And the reason I keep hearing back is, well, all these rural Congress people, the biggest organization in their district is the school. True, but that's also true in Florida. And they have tons of school choice, right? And as we all know, people who come to the foundation, if you empower the consumer, the producer improves. If you give the money to the producer, there's never improvement. There's no incentive to improve. What if, rather than being given food stamps, you were forced to go to that local grocer that's closest to your home? Imagine what the fruit would look like, the vegetables would look like, the service you'd get. But they're not that bad of grocery stores when I taught on the south side of Chicago, because they're all competing for that consumer's dollar, right? And we know the exact same thing would happen with education. Our school, we're intending to go after those kids who really want to achieve big things in life. But there's also kids who want to do other things with their lives. Why can't you choose a school that's right for you or for the needs of what your child needs? It shouldn't be one size fits all. It's not that way in any other place in the economy other than, let's see, the cost of selling homes and schools, right? Those are the two big monopolies out there. So I've heard the excuse why Texas can't get it done, but Florida has the same situation. They've gotten it done.
Well, Stacy spent a ton of time on this subject, so please go ahead, Geoff, if you want to jump in, and then we'll wrap.
Don't hit me, Stacy.
No, I won't take everyone's time on this. It's a long conversation about the plight of the school choice fight in Texas, but I welcome both of you to it. And I am very excited that you're here. It truly is, it's low hanging fruit for Texas. We all understand that having choice, having innovation, having some sense of a market is going to drive better outcomes for everybody involved. And it really is one of the great government monopolies, and it really is about castle protecting. Some quick comparisons between Texas and Florida. Texas has 1,200 school districts. Florida has 50 something. So while you have to reckon with your 56 superintendents, we have to reckon with 1,200. There's lots of other comparisons that are similar, but it ends up being a very powerful influence at the Capitol. And I could, talk about the political realities of that. However, times change, and there is a lot more openness to the kinds of school choice that they have in Arizona and Florida that we don't have today, which is really allowing the private market to participate and allowing families to have, use education dollars in the private market. What we do have in Texas is really good charter school laws for charters that exist. So it's extremely hard and burdensome to get a state charter in Texas. But once you do, and if you do well, you can grow with abandon. And that has happened. And that's been one of the really great opportunities in Texas for people to have choice, to have offerings. And we're seeing that continue to be something that's thriving. I hope it's something that we continue to take better advantage of in Texas. It's something I've certainly focused a lot on. And I think there's the other reality is that you can't inhibit progress. And technology, again, has allowed us to provide world-class education at lower and lower price points. And so people are starting to experiment with school models that don't have extremely expensive facilities off the bat or extremely expensive labor and other kinds of setups off the bat, and therefore are able to do it privately without the benefit of public dollars. It's slower, and it starts with the haves, but that is what often happens with new technologies. And what we're seeing now is more capital and more thought leadership going to the space than has happened in the last couple of centuries. And that is picking up speed. And once you start to see that kids can love learning, we can protect that curiosity and that inquisitiveness, and that we can let kids move at their own pace. They can be far more productive, far more engaged. You just can't ever let it go. And so I'm seeing that take hold all over the place. And Austin happens to be a hotbed for education innovation right now. And it's seeds, but you kind of take it for granted when you don't realize it when you're in it. And then you look back on it and you realize this wave happened. And I think we're experiencing that right now in Austin and in Texas.
Well said. Joe L. Alpha School. Austin's the innovator on early like K through 12 education for sure. So, lots of good stuff happening here.
Well, thank you to the Texas Public Policy Foundation for hosting, for Rex for partnering, and please join me in thanking the panel for a great conversation.
Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to join us upstairs on the 6th floor for a cocktail reception and wonderful food if you'd like to.